Hey everybody, Satanno here. Thanks for joining me for another look at games and gaming. I'd like to make a quick apology at the start here. My two screaming and yelling children refusing to go to sleep last night kept me from recording this and posting it on time, but well, thanks for your patience. If you recall my first week, I was on about Mass Effect 3 and BioWare's caving to grumpy fan pressure for a better ending to the series. Well, this week I finally polished off my second run of the game, this time with the extended DLC ending added onto it. The verdict is, not worth the fuss and a net loss for the series. In short, the DLC package includes some extra dialogue between Shepard and the Catalyst regarding the choices available to you for the endgame, a few vignettes highlighting the supporting cast's exploits after Shepard's death, and an additional monologue by one of the supporting cast is read over various images of the galaxy towards the end. Now, first, the extra dialogue between Shepard and the Catalyst is pretty worthless, and it just seems to me to just be another bit of hand-holding for players who want everything spelled out for them exactly. It strips away all potential mystery about the fate of the galaxy by literally telling you exactly what is going to happen after each choice. Way to break suspense there, guys. Skipping to the final monologues, I would say they're neither much of an addition or a subtraction, and just sort of there, pretty much a wash. The vignettes are the only bit here that I support being appended without any kind of reservations. Having a glimpse into what happens to all of these characters that you've grown attached to over the series provides a sense of closure missing from the original ending. Although I have to point out, at least from where I'm sitting, that lack of closure is only apparent because of the release of the extended cut itself. Figure out that paradox for me, would you? Ironically, I think these scenes betray the weakness of that approach if we look at it through the lens of a series which has been doing exactly this in every installment, and that's Fallout. The glaring difference which makes Fallout end successfully in this style is the same which weakens Mass Effect, and that is the player character. Fallout's protagonist is a clear example of the Western RPG character paradigm, a blank slate with no real personality to speak of. In every installment of the series, it's the effect of the player character's passing through that is expounded on, because the character him or herself has no defining characteristics that can be elaborated post-adventure. Consequently, the stories of how the rest of the Wasteland got along afterwards carry a great deal of emotional value and makes for a rather satisfying end to each game. In stark contrast to this, we have Commander Shepard, who, whether a beacon of selfless heroism or a total douchebag, wields his or her personality as their most versatile and powerful weapon. So it should be no surprise that someone like me, and many other gamers I can imagine, would barely even notice that we don't hear about what befell the rest of the group. Commander Shepard is the only one who really mattered in the story, and he or she is the only one who really demands any fanfare in the closing of the series. I would also point out that the short dialogues in-game between Shepard and his crew before the final conflict carry a great deal more meaning than anything seen in the aftermath. In the end, I think that compromising the original ending to mollify a petulant group of fans weakened the finale to the Mass Effect saga. Had the game ended with one ending or the other, like practically every other game on the planet, I wouldn't have batted an eye either way. Moreover, as I mentioned in the first video, this is a net loss for the original artistic vision of the BioWare team. Specifically because of the dramatic baggage that heralded this change, I feel like I've just watched the video game equivalent of a parent buying an expensive toy for an inconsolable child just to get them to shut the hell up. Now, this leads me somewhat into the territory that I'd like to expand upon today. It's my strong belief that the term RPG has been both horribly misapplied and stripped of almost all meaning in video games, and we need a new set of terms that define many common mechanics and game styles. So just what the hell is role-playing? Well, before I get into this, it's important to point out that there is an argument to be made that all video games are role-playing in a sense. Because you inhabit and control an avatar's actions, you are, by default, playing the role of that character. But since only maybe driving games and simulations are exempt from this rule, making that sort of statement just renders the entire conversation meaningless. So let's just ignore that. At the risk of hyperbole, I think that the vast majority of video game players have no clue what role-playing is. I've been a tabletop gamer for over 20 years now, and I like to think that I have at least an idea of what this term means. At the core of role-playing is the creation of a persona, the personality and drive that brings your character to life. It's the decisions made by that character, ideally from the perspective of that character rather than the player, influence the game world around them and lead to the conclusion of the story. So you play your character's role. Role-playing. There's often a lot of numbers and rules governing what your character can and cannot accomplish in these games, but that's really ancillary. The biggest problem is, especially with the rise of video games, is that role-playing has come to mean little but those rules and numbers. Case in point, Final Fantasy. As time has passed, this dinosaur of a series has not only come to be the standard bearer for the entire genre of video games, but also the epitome of what role-playing literally is not. Literally zero decision-making, zero player input into characterization, and zero player agency. It's effectively little more than a story with bits where you can push buttons to kill monsters. I'm not saying this is bad in and of itself, but it most certainly is not role-playing. On the other end of the spectrum, we have games like the aforementioned Mass Effect and Fallout series, or better still, the criminally underrated Alpha Protocol. Each of these games offers opportunities for the player to decide how their character will resolve a situation, and those decisions frequently impact the outcome of the game. Obviously, the limitations of storage and development money demand a finite number of options and outcomes, but I would also posit that even a tabletop game is limited to the decisions of the dungeon master, referee, or what have you. It's just that the better ones will make that part invisible. Now, all this talk is fine and good, but what then to do with the horrifically abused term RPG in the video game sphere? Well, for starters, I suggest adopting a completely different nomenclature for games which bandy the term RPG elements about. Well, let's be frank here. Nothing about a weapon, a skill, suit of armor, or clothing has any bearing on the role of that character. They are tools and nothing more. Still, examining this misnomer can be useful. When you take a look at some of the more egregious offenders, and Call of Duty really springs to mind, there are 2 or 3 elements which really spring out as catalysts for this behavior: leveling systems, skill advancement, and accessory options. Now, the first 2 are perhaps understandable, being mechanics which most tabletop games make use of. Let's just set the third aside for now, the red-headed stepchild that it is. While leveling and skill advancement are in fact elements of many RPGs, using the tag RPG element is rather disingenuous. It's a little bit like claiming Grand Theft Auto has FPS elements because you can aim in first person. Is there some problem with simply stating a game has level-based advancement? Okay, maybe that's not the catchiest term out there, so how about something like dynamic skill progression? That's not so bad, right? Now, I'm not trying to say this is a major issue, but it is rather annoying. The big issue, as referenced by my Final Fantasy statement before, is that some, dare I say many, RPGs these days seem to have very little RP going on. Now, it's Japanese developers that are most guilty of this sort of thing, but there are plenty of Western developers that are just as bad. I'm looking at you, Elder Scrolls. Yeah, I said it. Look. Just because you're talking to NPCs and going through reams of dialogue to make a yes or no decision on a quest offer does not equal role-playing, no matter how much of that dialogue is involved. Even the best written story does not make a game an RPG unless you have agency. And by agency, I mean the ability to alter the course and/or conclusion of the game based on your decisions. Just do me a favor. Go play Oblivion, and tell me how many of the choices you made in the game left any impact on the game world, especially the ending. Then go find Alpha Protocol, and play that, and tell me which one really lets you play a role. You might just see my point. I would very much like to see only games that have the combination of plot and agency be branded as RPGs. Games wearing that tag now could be referred to as story-driven action, or a complex storyteller, or something like that. Of course, I realize that this is likely not going to happen since marketers are going to stick whatever the hell they feel like it on the game box, and reviewers are only going to use whatever language gets the point across no matter how inaccurate it is. As a fan of video games, tabletop RPGs, and accurate language, I like to think it's not a pipe dream to say that sometime in the future we can speak about these things in the clearest possible language. On a final note, I'd like to say that in the interest of creating a better quality video, from now on I intend to switch to a bi-weekly production. between work, my family, and all the other things going on in my life, it's a little bit difficult to get this thing done on a weekly basis with anything approaching coherence. I'm hoping that with an extra week to put this together, I can add an extra layer of polish to the entire endeavor. So, thanks for tuning in again, and I hope I'll see you again in a couple of weeks.